Hi, I'm Alex Merton-McCann. Welcome to the Grown Up Girls Report podcast.
Today we're sitting down with Alex Merton-McCann, creator of the podcast The Grown Up Girls Report and Cybermum for McAfee. Last year, Alex launched the podcast Grown Up Girls Report for women who are juggling work, kids, ageing parents, community responsibilities, and an untidy house. The podcast has rapidly grown in popularity, and as I sit right in the target market, I can tell you it's like a warm hug from your best friend, and then sitting down for a cuppa together. I put it on when I need comfort food. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks, Sanny.
Every story has a setup, challenge, and a resolution. What are the key components to a great story for your podcast, The Grown Up Girls Report?
So I think before we even get to the story, it's really important for me that my guest has what I call a connectability. I know it's a weird word, but the ability to tell a story, but to be warm, to be authentic, to be honest, and to share their truth. I think that is really, really important. And to have a sense of humour. That is everything. And authenticity is really, really important for me because I think 2020 has been the year where we are craving real stories. We are craving authenticity. So it's very important for me that I ensure all my guests are authentic and speak from the heart. The other thing for me in a story that's important is that I suppose acknowledging that not all stories are going to have happy endings. We are living in an imperfect world, and unfortunately tragedy and grief are very much things that we all have to negotiate around. But when people tell a story, I like to put a lens on, like a learning lens or a silver lining lens. So a story can be shared and we can experience the emotions associated with that. But then we can take a moment to think about, well, what could be learned from that, or what are the silver linings associated with a story?
I think why your podcast resonates so well with people is because you bring people to the resolution rather than just wallowing in, what the problem is.
Yes, totally, because we can spend hours wallowing, and there's an important place to wallow. We all need to wallow at some stage and go through those emotions. But I think where the growth occurs is when we can sit back and think, okay, well, this has happened. It was pretty average. It was really trying. So what can we do going forward to make it better? Podcasting seems to be the perfect avenue to do that now.
How do you go about understanding your target market and then deciding what to cover in the podcast?
For my target market, where women, I suppose, we're talking about things that are slightly more pertaining to their personal lives, Instagram and Facebook is where I need to be. So even, for example, a news story that's shared via a news platform on Facebook, me going through the comments and working out what women my age are talking about, what is of concern to them, how they interpret a news story is really, really powerful. The other thing that is, of course, so important for me is the feedback I get from listeners and followers. So we've this year introduced a book club during COVID, which has been such a highlight and such a joy. The other thing, which is a little bit harder, but is actually looking at my stats, being a little bit brutal. So, and I don't do it regularly because it's a little bit hard, but looking at, what episodes performed well, what episodes were a little bit slower on the uptake, and then asking myself hard questions. Why was it slow? Was the story not told properly? Did I not take people to a resolution? Were there no learnings from the story? Was the audio crap? Did I speak too quickly? Because I can often do that. So I need to be a bit hard with myself as well and work out, where I went wrong or where I went right. The other thing is just talking to people. And my husband can't understand why I go and have coffees with people for 2 hours or I'm on the phone for 45 minutes. But I say to him, no, it's research. And to be honest, that's probably where the bulk of my ideas come from. A friend who's going through a problem or experiencing a challenge that I've then worked out that quite a few other ladies are as well. And that often sows the seed in my mind, and then I go on a deep dive. And then I will go to social media and see who else is talking about this and do my research and see what news platforms are covering it. And then it sort of takes on an energy of its own.
I think that's really interesting because we talk about social media being a terrible thing that's, a awful thing that's happening to society, and it's sapping our self-confidence and making us all anxious and all that kind of stuff. But in actual fact, it can really provide a community where people can feel like they belong and they are understood and they can speak their voice and get resolutions and help with issues.
Oh, Zanny, absolutely. When social media is used in a positive, good fashion, it is such a powerful tool, like nothing we have ever experienced. Now, of course, we need to say that, that doesn't always work that way. It can be used for, for poor and ill intentions, and we need to acknowledge that. But I think that 2020 has been the year where social media has triumphed. I mean, if you think about the weeks that we've had in lockdown, and we've got friends very overseas who are still very much in lockdown. If it wasn't for social media, I just hate to think what would have happened to people's sense of community and sense of belonging. It's provided such a connectedness.
How important is storytelling to your podcast?
Storytelling is everything to my podcast. My podcast would not exist without stories. And I think 2020 has very much proven that. I think that this year we have craved human connection. We are humans. We are wired for social connection. And for us to be able to connect with somebody, we need to be able to hear their story, to understand their motivations, and it is so incredibly powerful.
When we were all isolated in our homes and we all crave that connection of going to work, being on the train, being at soccer, matches on the weekend. It's really interesting to kind of hold that mirror up to us this year.
Oh, absolutely. And if I think about some of the authors that I've interviewed this year, there's a couple of Aussie authors who've written some really interesting memoirs. So there's an interesting author called Shannon Malloy. Now, Shannon's actually a journalist for news.com, and he's written this powerful memoir called 14. And it's the story of his life when he was 14 at a very alpha, boys-only school in northern Queensland. Now, Shannon experienced incredible bullying, like terrifying bullying. He even thought about taking his own life. And during that period of time, he came out. And it was one of the most moving pieces of writing I have ever written. Now, when I interviewed Shannon, I said to him, Shannon, tell me why it was so important for you to tell this story. And he said, because I wanted people to know that there's hope. That when you're a teenager, life is tough. Regardless of your sexuality, life as a teenager can be really tough. But I want people to know that there is hope, that it's never going to last forever. There are good times ahead. And I think storytelling can be so powerful, and people can be so reassured by hearing people's stories. Stories can feed people's souls. They can incite change. They can provide reassurance. They're incredibly powerful.
What stories really resonate with your audience on the Grown Up Girls Report?
The stories that are real and raw and authentic, and the stories where there is resolution. If I'm completely honest, so I think back to early in the days. I interviewed this incredible Australian doctor called Dr. Andrew Browning. Now, he has set up this foundation called the Barbara May Foundation, and his sole purpose is to basically go to various places in Africa and help women who have suffered birth trauma, or what we call fistulas. So a lot of these women have traumatic births, and they basically become incontinent. And in Africa, up until recently, there has not been the know-how to help these women. So he has set up this foundation called the Barbara May Foundation and established hospitals. And over his career, he's probably, mid-40s, late 50s, or mid-40s, 50s. Over his career, he has probably helped 10,000 women. He has provided life-changing surgery to these women. Now, when I was interviewing Andrew, he was telling me the stories of 2 or 3 different ladies. And there was one lady in particular who had this, I think, 2-day birth, unsuccessful birth. Unfortunately, her baby died during childbirth, but she was completely incontinent. The birth was, she was in a terrible way afterwards. Now, her husband divorced her as a result of that, and her family was so embarrassed and ashamed of the fact that she was completely incontinent. So they built her a mud hut in the back, basically the backyard, and she basically had to live in the mud hut. So their lives, these ladies' lives, are hopeless. There is nothing for them. It's just basically a waiting game till they die, because they can barely even show their face in public. So Andrew, through this life-changing surgery, has given these women their lives back. And in all of the stories he shared, these women basically went on to get married, to have children again, and he gave them their life back. And people just loved that, and it was just such a wonderful, powerful story. And also the story of a man who dedicated his whole life to helping and changing outcomes for people was really powerful. The other story, which was just an absolute honour to tell, was of a woman called Alice Achan, who is a Ugandan woman who would be now in her mid-40s. And from the age of about 13 onwards, she spent basically 5 years on the run from the LRA, the Lord's Resistance Army. And she basically had brothers and sisters younger than her she was looking after for 5 years while they hid in trees and in creeks and in bushes. And she basically just endured incredible physical violence and trauma. And then she looked after her nieces and nephews because their parents had died, and she lost them all to AIDS, HIV. This woman had encountered such incredible trauma, but she realised that there were a lot of girls that were taken as child brides by the LRAs. There was a lot of sexual violence that occurred during the reign of the LRA. So she actually set up an academy for girls called the Padar Girls Academy, and has built this amazing school and given these girls their lives back. And again, has put her whole life into helping others. And so her story just resonated with people on a level that many didn't, again, because she's given everything and was so committed to change.
There's quite a lot of trauma in those stories.
There is.
And I might go so far as to say quite removed from what many of your listeners' day-to-day lives would be like. What is it about that story that is so, it connects so much with them?
I think it is the hope that they have, the fact that in both cases, from Andrew, day in day out, seeing yet another story of another female who has endured horrendous trauma, he's able to keep going. His ability to keep going regardless of how hard it is. And again, Alice as well, she endured years, 15, 20 years of incredible hardship, but she had this tenacity, and she had this vision that there was something better there. And I think that is what people really resonate with. Yes, because our lives are so completely different, to mainstream Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane, wherever it is, to Uganda. Very, very different, but it's their hope and their yearning for something better.
And I suppose it's also, everyone's going through their own stuff that they're dealing with. And if someone's going through such an extreme tragedy,
yes,
and comes out with hope and a great result at the end, then there's hope for all of us.
Exactly. It does give you perspective, absolute perspective, if someone can experience something so hard and come out of it. But I'm also very aware that there's no hierarchy of pain. So if someone's having a bad day, they've had in my case, it happens a lot. There's something's happened with one of their kids, and it just, there's a lot of trauma. That can be very, very real in the moment. Yeah.
Do you know when you're telling the story, or when you're doing the podcast with someone, do you sit in it going, this is going to be really amazing, this one's going to really resonate with my audience?
Absolutely. And it's when they really open up, and when I get a little pot of gold when they're chatting, I think, oh my goodness, I didn't realise this. And it's usually, again, when they're being very honest, and they're probably being a little emotional. That's when we can really just get to the depth of a great story.
And how far do you feel like you can go with people? Do you know at the time?
You need to have trust with the people you're interviewing, and also with your audience. I would never want to make anyone feel embarrassed or humiliated or filled with shame.
I feel like this is a very privileged position to sit and talk to someone and ask them to tell their story in front of the camera, that's going to be shared with everyone. And we told a story recently of a family whose son was a mountain biker and ended up in a wheelchair, and we spent a long time with the family talking to everyone. And at the end of it, we felt like they'd said stuff to us that they hadn't said to each other, which was incredibly privileged, but had a huge responsibility as well.
Yes.
And it's something like that you have to carry very softly and carefully for people.
Yes, I agree. There is a massive responsibility that comes with having someone open up to you and making sure you can guide them properly. I will spend quite a lot of time putting together a plan to make sure that I've covered everything off, that I have presented them in the best light, that I've allowed them to tell their story in the best possible way. And when I'm editing something, because I edit everything myself, I will listen to things 3 or 4 times, and I'll say, have I made sure that I am representing them in the best way? Would there be a better way? Should I tweak this? Should I change that? Because I want to give them the best opportunity to shine as well. But it's a big responsibility, definitely. And a great honour.
What stories do you think are not currently being told?
I think we all need more stories, real, genuine stories of human journeys, of challenges, of pain, of people's self-discovery, because I think that's how we can connect, and I think that's what we wanted. I think we're ready for that now. I don't think we were 2 or 3 years ago. I think we wanted everything to be perfect and lovely, but I think we really now want real stuff. We're craving it, and so my focus for 2021 and beyond will be to ensure that I continue to tell, and maybe even go even further, telling my authentic, real stories and helping my guests to do so.
Well, we all look forward to a lot more stories on your podcast. What does an amazing story achieve for your podcast?
So amazing stories can do a couple of different things. First of all, it can make a listener think, reevaluate, consider, maybe even do a little bit of self-reflection. And if it allows them to do that, if it encourages them to do that, well, I think it's achieved its goal. Stories can also provide great reassurance that we're not alone, and I think that's what 2020 has done. You know, to hear a story of someone who is going through something that's similar to us, the highs, the lows, the stresses, the challenges, whether it's to do with our children or our aging parents, the struggles they're going through, can be so reassuring, and it can provide such great comfort, which is what we have all needed in 2020, definitely.
In your career, you've seen the rise of digital communications and social media. Do you think this has changed storytelling?
You know, I've been in this communications game for 20-something years. I want to say 5, 6, 7, something like that. And when I started out as a fresh graduate, I spent hours standing by the fax machine, faxing press releases to journalists, or at the post office, armed with press packs that I could barely carry to send off to media outlets. So getting stories in front of the media back then was a much more arduous task. But yeah, look, digital communications has changed everything, and primarily smartphones. I think smartphones is where it all is, because we now have got the ability to hear a story, or to read a story, or to see a story in the palm of our hands, and we can do that anywhere, any country, 24/7. So storytelling is a whole new generation. And I also think that what's interesting is that storytelling via visual communication, I really think is far more powerful. Audio is also really great. I think when you're listening to a story via audio, it is an uninterrupted experience.
I only do it in the car when I'm on my own, and it's my special time, and I listen to the things that I really love that feed my soul.
Yes.
And it's my time.
Yes.
What's your favourite story to tell?
So my favourite story to tell, often people will say to me, so where did the idea come from for the Grown Up Girls Report podcast? So the whole idea actually started probably 4 or 5 years ago. Now, my 2 younger boys went through quite a period where they had quite significant chronic illnesses, tick-based issues, and we had to travel overseas extensively to get help. And on my last trip overseas, I took my now 19-year-old to this stunning country called Cyprus, which I highly recommend everyone goes to at some stage in their life. And so we were there for 6 weeks. So he went to this day treatment facility every day for about 4 weeks. And we had a little apartment at night we'd come home to. That were long days, and he was so very unwell. And this treatment was oxygen and ozone therapy. It made him feel incredibly unwell. And so obviously it's a long distance between Sydney to Cyprus. It was, 20-something hours on the plane, many time zones removed, and I left all of my other boys and my husband on the other side of the world. So, and I was there for a long period of time and feeling incredibly lonely. And we didn't know whether this treatment was going to work. We had thrown everything at this illness, and we had spent vast amounts of money, and we were just so incredibly hopeful that it would work. And I remember one night when I was feeling just broken, just so down, thinking, I've got nothing left after this. And it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't sleep. And I thought, how am I going to get through this? And then all of a sudden I got a message on my phone from a friend who said, Alex, thinking about you. It's all going to be okay. We're rooting for you back here. And it was that moment where I thought, yes, I am so grateful to have support from so many incredible family and members and friends. And I know he's going to get better, and I know things are going to change. And when he does, I'm going to do everything I can to help other people and to scoop women up, because I know that we often feel we are at the coalface of our children's struggles, and it can feel so incredibly overwhelming. And you feel like you're broken some days, you can't go on. But it was that message in that moment that just made me think, yes, you can do this. And I vowed that I would help people when he got better. He's going to get better, and I vowed that I would do so. And yes, he got better. I'm pleased to tell you he got better, and he's at uni, he got through school, and so the Grown Up Girls Report is all about my turn to give back after people gave to me when I was in a pretty big, significant trough. So that's where it's all about for me.
Well, it's a pretty big give back to a lot of people who really treasure the podcast, and it speaks very directly to them. So we thank you for your gift to all of us.
Oh, thank you, Zanny. It is an absolute honour and privilege. I just want to scoop people up and make them, reassure them that they're not alone, that there is hope, that your struggles are not just your struggles. We're all going through similar things. So it's an honour for me. Thank you.
You okay?
Yeah. Okay.
No, sorry.
Sorry.